Today, we're once again talking about some of the absolute scumbag techniques that Fanatics is using to get customers jump on their platform and spend money. This kind of stuff is just straight up gambling type advertisement, in my personal opinion, and it needs to stop. If this is not something that Michael Rubin gets a hold of, I think we're going to continue to see some issues in this space, in particular with the sort of terrible breakers that we see operate in this platform, the terrible people that operate in this hobby that, really shouldn't be here and are really ruining it for sort of everybody else. Now, I'm going to clarify my thoughts on that in a few minutes, but fundamentally, this relates to two posts that Collectors MD tagged me in earlier today that I just think is utterly insane. And I don't understand how people can see this and think it's not an issue, it's not gambling, and it's perfectly fine. I can't comprehend why people see this and think our hobby needs more of it. Now, I briefly touched on this in my live stream earlier today, but it is this post over here where, somebody reached out to Collectors MD and said they received a $50 credit from Fanatics in their email because they had not been, using the platform in quite some time. Now, straight off the bat, I think the second thing I'm going to show is a lot worse than this. But straight off the bat, stuff like this, is just trying to entice people to jump on a platform and spend money. And when you think about, like we've talked about in the past, how Fanatics Live operates in particular with breaking and repacking, the nature of getting customers to interact, the nature of participating in a break and buying it, feeds on that same part of your brain that these gambling, platforms do. And obviously, when you've got people down bad, they can't help themselves. And the fact that you've got no controls in place on a Fanatics Live platform is terrible, right? And people can get into really significant debt. And we've talked about that, time and time again. People will hear stories like this and say that this is perfectly fine. But once you do a bit of research, you actually see how big of a problem this is. And once you start sitting in on some of these live streams, and you can do it on, YouTube too, but also on Whatnot, where you've got people participating in breaks, a lot of these breakers really employ predatory tactics to try and get customers to spend more money, right? They'll talk up hits, they'll try and pressure people. They got skunked on a box to buy into another break to try and chase their tail. They'll push, the weird card games and duck races with people. They'll put all these other things in there that if you sit back and watch this kind of thing, you're like, this is gambling. And if you show it to, somebody outside of the hobby, they'll basically say the same thing. And when it's done that way is sort of where the issue comes, right? There's not an issue with participating in a break. There's not an issue with buying a repack. But when these platforms have no controls to stop people or protect people from themselves, I think it's a problem, especially then when you've got the people selling it, pressuring people to do the same sorts of things. And obviously there's a lot of really good breakers out there, but I think you guys will get with what I'm, saying right now. The fact that you've got a platform, offering a $50 credit to try and get people to jump in and spend, I just think create a bit of an unsavory, situation. And obviously this in of itself is fine. Getting people encouraged to sort of use your service is what you're there to do as a business. But when this sort of happens without oversight, I think is where the problem comes in my personal opinion. And like Collectors MD says over here, maybe you can drop a response down in the comments below, is seeing something like this to try and come in and spend the money and having them match what you're going to put in or, entice you to rip. Is that similar to what you're seeing with these casinos and their free-to-play offers? I personally think it is for the reasons that I've just mentioned a bit earlier, but I want to know your thoughts down in the comments below. Now, like I says over here, these platforms deliberately design ways to hook you in while offering zero protection or oversight. There's simply no denying its predatory behavior, which, I completely agree with. When you look at, these gambling platforms here in Australia and obviously over in the US as well, and also around the world, for them to sort of participate as gambling entities, they need to have licenses, right? And that basically means they need to do certain things. And part of those certain things is controls around who can, go on those platforms, what kind of advertising can be done, how, customers can prevent stop losses, they can put limits, they can do all these kinds of things to sort of protect themselves, right? There's mandates around, advertising for help to be sought, right? Like they'll have here in Australia, as an example, after every gambling ad, there's a gambling, call that you can make or a gambling phone number that you can take if you're struggling, as an example. When you use the apps, the same sort of thing is there. When you use these apps, there's a certain amount of money that can only be spent, in a short period, right? These things that exist to protect customers, because unfortunately what we're seeing when people have this portion of their brain picked on, they can get into some pretty dark holes. And I think businesses have an obligation to look after their consumer base. I've talked about this before. People in the comments have said, well, Daniel, you need to sort of get over it. People need to protect themselves. We can't help them. If they want to go into debt, they want to go into debt. That's not okay, right? We need to help people from themselves. We are a hobby at the end of the day. We need to look after each other. And I think, Stuff like that is the slippery slope, especially then when it goes onto those platforms and the people selling the breaks are absolute scumbags and they're looking to, find every nook and cranny to rip their customers off. And they want to get every edge that they can. And more often than not, that means they take advantage of their customers. And I think that goes hand in hand with what we're sort of seeing over here, where you've got, again, Fanatics sort of offering, an exclusive spend, rip, and get rewarded program that is very much enticed on getting people to spend crazy amounts of money, again, with no oversight. And you'll say that this is a business's right to do what they want. They're there to make money. I completely agree. But there's a way to make money and look after your customers at the same sort of time. And obviously, probably while I've been talking, you guys would be reading what's on screen. But what Fanatics are essentially doing is what you're seeing here. You've earned this an exclusive offer built for our top collectors. Spend, rip, and get rewarded. So between October 9th and October 12th, so essentially going on right now, spend at least $5,000 on live breaks, which is an insane amount of money. And you'll receive $500 in rewards just for doing what you already love. No opting in required, no hoops to jump through. How it works: make purchases or rips totaling $5,000 or more during the promotion period. Check your order history to track your progress, and then receive your $500 reward code via email on the 13th of October. This to me is just straight up predatory behavior, and we need to see less of it. I completely agree with what Collectors MD is saying over here. Like, this stuff has shown to be needed for the industry, especially in the modern industry. There's so much that's propped up off the back of platforms like this and breakers selling cards like this, and people having these cards funnel into the hobby for them to flip. This has shown that it's needed to be there, even though I don't completely agree with how it's done these days. But we need some control in place to protect people. And it's one of those things that's just incredibly sketchy. And I can only say, guys, if you've never been in a Whatnot room or a Fanatics Live room or any breaking room before, go ahead and watch it, and watch how these breakers go ahead and sell things to their consumers. I just think it's terrible. And I don't like what it's doing to this industry and the sentiment that it's creating and what it's going to do, long term. Like, I think it's, just a terrible thing. And that might sound a bit beta to some of you guys, but like, I'm trying to think long term about how this hobby can be sustainable. And when you have platforms push stuff like this and then give no oversight to the people breaking on the platforms, it's just not conducive to a successful industry long term. And I think we're going to see some issues, especially if we ever see an economic downturn similar to what we saw, 5 years ago. There's so much money in this industry these days propped up by platforms like this that need this kind of money. They need these businesses to be pushing, this kind of spending. And if that's not going to be there, it's quite scary. And I think when you've got businesses running like this that are going to be pushing people away, I think it's going to be quite, damaging, long term. And maybe that's me, being too pessimistic, but it's one of those things. It just makes me, really, really uncomfortable. And I don't like seeing it. I think we need to see some sustainability and accountability happen with this sort of stuff. Now, like the other day, I said in my live stream today, we saw Whatnot implement this repack regulation, right? This self-regulation. And my big concern with that is, are they actually going to police it? Because some of the wording they've already put in there, is not good enough and sort of indicates they might take the soft approach. So who's to say that if Fanatics was to take some control here, they do the same thing? But I just think we need to see something. And I'm really nervous. I'll say it again. I've been saying it for 4 years. If businesses are not going to do it themselves, somebody's going to come in and do it for them at some point. And I think if somebody comes in externally, like a regulator or some, gambling agency, I think it's going to do more harm than good for this industry. And I think people need to be a bit careful about that. So, it is what it is. You guys can let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. I just think it's super sketchy and I just don't like it. And I'm not saying we don't need breakers, right? I've talked before. I love going into breaks. I've not been in that many in the last couple of years, but I was heavily into it in the mid 2010s. Why did I say it like that? The mid 2010s. So I think it's a bit of fun, but it's not sustainable long term. And in how it currently is, you got all these businesses just looking for that edge, doing all this shady shit. It's just not good enough. It's not what this hobby is all about. And yeah, I just really want to know what you guys have to say on that down in the comments below. Just quickly, if you could like the video, that would be amazing. If you leave a comment as well, or even boost the video with a YouTube new feature, that would be awesome. I've talked about it on my live stream today. The algorithm has been really brutal to me over the last 3 months. My videos are essentially not getting pushed. My engagement on the videos themselves in terms of viewer interaction, likes, watch time, click-through rates is still as good as it's ever been, right? But it's just not being pushed anymore. And I don't know why YouTube has done that. Part of me thinks it's because over the last, 6 months, or first 6 months of the year, was a bit reduced content. Instead of doing 3 videos a week, I was maybe doing 2. So I think maybe some of that has had to do with it. And I've talked before, it's because my son was born last year, so focused on family, focusing on work. I think that's come back to bite me on the backside a little bit, which is dumb because obviously I would make the same decision again to look after those two things because they're far more important than YouTube. But my channel has struggled a little bit. So I'm like, is it that? But then when I look at the metrics a bit closer, it's just the videos are just not getting pushed. And that happens sometimes on YouTube. Consistency will help bring that back. But your engagement, your comments, your sharing of the video, your making sure the notification bell is ticked will help me a lot because the videos are just not going to my subscribers. They're not being pushed and it's not anything other than that. So it's interesting, but if you could do that, that would be amazing. No pressure if you don't want to. It is what it is. But yeah, just drop your thoughts on this one down in the comments below. Just quickly on the whole algorithm thing. I had people in the comment section today of the live stream that I did basically say that they've not seen my videos pop up anymore. So that goes to some of the things that I'm talking about. So if you guys can help me out, that would be amazing, right? This channel is here to help. I don't do it for anything other than wanting to help people, which is why I've been still making videos, irrespective of the fact that my views have basically gone down in half compared to what they were before. So, I do this as a passion project. I want to help people. I talk about topics like today, not because it's the new norm to talk about like it is with a lot of content creators. I've been talking about, breaking being a concern for 4 to 5 years when people, that would be praising this sort of stuff back then and now saying the opposite, right? They're now saying it's a problem. I told you guys it was a problem before a lot of people did. And, that just shows that I do this for fun and not anything else. So I'm rambling, probably not making sense. You guys can let me know your thoughts down below and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.